I'm going to begin with the most intense of all the strange things to ever happen to me. The time I either hallucinated the most realistic hallucination to ever be hallucinated while on my second of 3 days of labor with my son, or maybe, just maybe, my consciousness left my body and went somewhere else for a minute or 5. So we're going to go back about 5 years. My son was 2 weeks past due and I was being induced. I went in on a Sunday afternoon and I did not give birth to him until a Tuesday afternoon. So it was intense. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. There was a lot of Pitocin involved. On day 2, I started using nitrous oxide for pain relief. And maybe, I'm not sure how long I had been using the nitrous when I had this experience. It was a few hours, at least. And I, 1 minute I was in the hospital room on the hospital bed, inhaling from the nitrous mask. And I was in horrific pain. I had been on Pitocin for at least 12, I think I'd been on Pitocin for 17 hours at this point. And it was a lot of pain. The most pain I'd ever experienced at that point, for sure. And I just, 1 minute I was there, and the next minute I was completely unaware of anything going on in the hospital room. There was no sort of out-of-body experience that people talk about. I never saw myself, I never experienced anything floating above my body. It was nothing like that. It was literally just one moment I was there, and the next moment I was like, boom, not there. What I was perceiving was an ultra-realistic experience, and so I'm not comfortable calling it a hallucination, because it was unlike any sort of hallucinatory experience I've ever had. This was ultra real. I could see, I could smell, I could feel. In this experience, I was standing in what looked like Scandinavia, somewhere in Scandinavia, Norway, that sort of like rocky, harsh but absolutely gorgeous terrain. Prior to this experience, my husband and I had been binging the TV show Vikings, and so I definitely think that influenced this experience to whatever extent. But despite the fact that it was clearly influenced by this show, I don't want to give the impression that like I hallucinated being in this TV show or something. That's not at all what this was. So I'm standing here in this, it was almost like the top of a mountainscape. There was a man in front of me, and he was sitting on a log or a tree stump or something like that. And he did not look like the main actor from that show, but he definitely looked like he could have fit in perfectly well on the Vikings show. So whoever this man was, he was certainly some sort of like a Viking styled avatar of whatever, something from my subconscious. I really have no idea. This is just purely the experience I had. There's this man sitting there styled in the old style Viking, 800 type of dress. And I'm standing in front of him, and I'm wearing this white, it really looked a lot like, if you think of those Greek, ancient Greek, style robes that you would see ancient Greeks wearing in art. It was that white kind of robe type thing. It was sort of cinched at the waist. In this experience, I was not pregnant. I had no belly at all. My whole experience was I was there, and I was in front of this man, and I was sobbing uncontrollably, full body heaving sobs. And I collapsed onto the ground and I grabbed my knees and I said, I can't do this anymore. And he said to me, yes, you can. Thousands of women have done this for thousands upon thousands of years, and so can you. And boom, I was back in the hospital room and I was back in my body, and my husband was right there next to me, and I was just thrown right back into everything again, fully aware of the pain. Actually, at that moment, I came to, and my husband said, I never lost consciousness in this experience. My body didn't go limp or anything like that, but my husband did say that as I was experiencing this, I got very quiet and I kind of got very still. So like I said, I didn't lose consciousness. My body never just sort of like flopped over or anything like that, but I became very still. My breathing slowed down. If I was to compare it to anything that I could really compare it to, I would say I was in a very deep sort of meditative state, but it was instantaneous. This isn't like I was going through my chakras or anything and trying to meditate. I was fully in the labor experience, and then it was almost like I could almost like hear like a snapping sound, to be honest. I was out of my body and in this sort of Scandinavian countryside talking to this Viking-looking man who was basically giving me a labor pep talk. And just as fast, like boom, I'm back in my body. In that moment when I kind of came back into the awareness of what was going on, that was the moment I said, I need an epidural. I couldn't handle it. In my head, all I really thought was that, okay, my body's reached a limit of how much pain it can handle, and I just had a pain-triggered experience. That was the best I could describe it. But after that, that was a hugely traumatic experience. I still, had another 20 hours of labor that I went through after that point. And there was a point in the labor where, again, I actually thought, I might die and my son might die too. He got stuck, and eventually a surgeon needed to come and use a vacuum to pull him out of me, which is a whole nother layer of trauma. But this was sort of the experience that I would say pushed me toward what most people call an awakening. Prior to this, I was not a religious person. I was raised, my mom really wanted me to be religious. She's still alive. She's a devout Catholic. I was raised in the Catholic environment. I went to multiple Catholic schools before I actually put my foot down and said, no more, I want to go to public school. I left the church officially when I was 12 because there was never a point in time where I believed the Catholic dogma. I always had major issues with the dogma. And I only say this because this sort of experience, like I wasn't, by the traditional sort of definition of being an awakened person or a religious person or a spiritual person or really any of those sort of qualifiers people use, I wasn't any of that. I called myself, throughout much of high school and college, I called myself a spiritual but not religious person. And then at some point when I became a little bit more educated on the different options out there, I settled on I'm agnostic. I just don't know. I'm not going to say one way or another. I don't, fully believe one thing, and I don't fully, not believe something. It's just I don't really know, and I've never felt comfortable saying or following any one thing. I only say this just to say that this one experience was the first experience that I would file under I have no vocabulary to describe this. It's weird, it's odd, it's strange. It's unlike anything else I ever experienced at any point, whether, nothing. This was a totally, wholly different experience. And this was the experience that sort of, quote unquote, awakened me to really examine, other experiences I had in the past prior to this one. Really, my whole life, I've had sort of experiences with weirdness. Not scary, but just unusual. And this labor experience where I just sort of, my awareness went somewhere else entirely. This was my, awakening to all this. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe. I am planning to post videos like this once a week, and I would really appreciate and love any support any of you want to give. Please like, subscribe, the whole deal. Thank you for listening.